night sky over the East China Sea burned faintly with the orange glow of afterburners. 50 Chinese warplanes cut through the darkness in a sweeping arc, their engines screaming as they surged toward the contested waters near the Senkaku Islands. It was not a training exercise. This was a show of force, a calculated test of resolve meant to rattle nerves and send a message. Beneath the starless sky, clusters of fishing boats drifted like harmless silhouettes. But hidden among them, unusual movements stirred. From the decks of modified trawlers and disguised barges, small kamikaze sea drones began to hum to life. Their electric motors buzzed like swarms of angry wasps, faint but unmistakable. On the horizon, one solitary figure stood between this gathering storm and the open Pacific, a U.S. Navy Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. Its steel hull cut through the waves with purpose, its crew of 300 men and women fully aware that this was no routine patrol. Deep inside the ship, radar screens pulsed with warning tones. Radios crackled as urgent reports flooded in. The order came swiftly through the chain of command. Prepare for a saturation attack. For months, tensions in the East China Sea had simmered just below boiling point. The Senkaku Islands, tiny, rocky, and uninhabited, held enormous symbolic value for both China and Japan. Bound by treaty to defend Tokyo's claims, the United States had become an unavoidable counterweight to Beijing's growing assertiveness. Every maneuver in these contested waters risked triggering a chain reaction that could ignite something larger, something no one wanted but everyone prepared for. China's strategy that night was deliberate. They would not rely on a single decisive strike. Instead, they aimed to overwhelm U.S. defenses through sheer volume. Waves of cheap, expendable drones capable of forcing American commanders into impossible choices. Spend millions of dollars firing advanced missiles to shoot them down, or risk letting one slip through. Overhead, the Chinese warplanes thundered closer, their presence meant to intimidate. But it was the swarm below that carried the true danger. Dozens, then hundreds of sea drones skimmed just above the waves, their radar signatures faint, like ghosts, until it was almost too late. The destroyer's sensors came alive, painting an expanding net of hostile contacts. Inside the Combat Information Center, sailors moved with disciplined precision. Battle stations were manned in seconds. Electronic warfare officers activated jammers to disrupt incoming guidance systems. Above the deck, an MH-60R Seahawk helicopter lifted off, skimming low across the Black Sea. It began dropping sonar buoys, scanning for underwater surprises and relaying targeting data to the ship. At higher altitude, a P-8A Poseidon aircraft circled silently, feeding real-time intelligence into the tactical picture. Then came the first wave. Evolved Sea Sparrow missiles roared into the night sky, their rocket trails glowing white-hot before they dove toward clusters of incoming drones. Explosions rippled across the surface like firecrackers, shattering the night with violent blossoms of flame and spray. Metal fragments rained down as shredded drones slammed into the waves. But for every wave destroyed, another followed. The swarm was designed to exhaust the defenders, to bleed ammunition, time, and focus. The ship's close-in weapon systems spun to life. Phalanx C IWS turrets whirred and screamed, firing streams of depleted uranium rounds at incoming targets, shredding drones seconds before impact. RIM-116RAM missiles picked off fast movers that slipped through the outer layers. Still, gaps began to appear. A handful of drones skimmed dangerously close to the hull before detonating harmlessly against the destroyer's wake. Inside the operations center, tension climbed. Ammunition counters ticked downward with every shot. The cost exchange was brutal. Millions spent to counter drones worth a fraction of that, and this was only the beginning. The night was about to test not just steel and technology, but human resolve. The first warning of the second wave came as a sharp, rising tone from the Combat Information Center. Multiple fast-moving contacts bearing 085, closing range. A radar operator barked. The display bloomed with blips scattered like a swarm of hornets. The commanding officer didn't hesitate. Battle stations, maintain fire discipline, prioritize cluster formations, don't waste missiles on stragglers. The destroyer's AN/SPY-1DV radar tracked the swarm with eerie precision, while electronic warfare officers jam frequencies, trying to confuse the guidance systems of the incoming drones. Above the waves, the Seahawk helicopter raced to its patrol sector, relaying sonar readings and scanning for hidden launch platforms. The second volley of evolved Sea Sparrow missiles cut through the darkness. White trails streaked upward, then arced down in graceful but deadly curves. Explosions illuminated the sea like a storm of fireflies, each detonation sending water columns skyward. Dozens of drones disintegrated mid-sprint, but it barely dented the overall assault. For every wave obliterated, another emerged from the shadows. The swarm was not reckless, it was methodical. Disguised fishing vessels on the horizon released new drones, timed to exploit reload windows between missile volleys. The enemy wasn't just attacking, they were learning. Close-in weapon systems roared. The Phalanx CIWS spun at blistering speed, its six-barreled Gatling gun spraying thousands of rounds per minute. Tracer fire carved glowing arcs through the night, shredding drones meters from the hull. EAR IM-116. Rolling airframe missiles picked off fast-moving boats trying to flank. But strain was beginning to show, not in the machines but in the crew. Below deck, sailors hauled fresh missile canisters and belts of ammunition to reloading stations, sweat pouring down despite the cool night air. In the operations center, tension thickened as ammunition counters crept toward critical levels. Every missile launch meant hundreds of thousands of dollars spent to destroy drones that cost a fraction of that. Above, the P-8 Poseidon tracked more disguised vessels moving into position. "They're not running out," the tactical officer muttered. "They're multiplying." The captain stared at the tactical plot, hundreds of moving contacts spreading across the sea like a living net. "They're probing us," he said quietly, measuring every reaction. The third wave hit from the west. ESSM streaked upward in quick succession, exploding in fiery blossoms. CIWS guns screamed, their barrels glowing red as they cut down drones slipping through. The ship shook under the rhythmic concussion of its own defenses. Shrapnel rattled across the deck, denting antennas and sensors. A few small explosions flared harmlessly in the wake, but each near miss carried weight. One lucky strike could change everything. Ammunition stores dipped into the red. Damage control teams stood ready. Every intercepted drone was a victory, but also a reminder of the brutal arithmetic of modern warfare. The cost exchange was exactly what Chinese planners intended. Force the destroyer to expend its magazines while they spent pennies on the dollar. Still, discipline held. The crew didn't panic. They adjusted firing priorities, focusing on clusters rather than chasing individual threats. The U.S. layered defense was holding, but the margin for error was vanishing. By now, the sea was alive with hostile intent. The destroyer's radar picture resembled a storm cloud made of metal and algorithms, while sonar buoys fed a constant stream of underwater echoes. The captain knew this was only the middle act. Somewhere beyond the horizon, more disguised vessels were preparing to unleash the next evolution of the swarm. The battle had shifted from immediate survival to strategic endurance. The ship wasn't just fighting drones, it was fighting a new doctrine, one designed to expose every weakness, every blind spot, every limit of its defenses. And as the night wore on, those limits were getting closer. Just as the crew found a rhythm, intercept, reload, intercept again, the swarm adapted. Dozens of drones suddenly dived beneath the surface, their small electric motors buzzing faintly under the waves. Radar returns thinned, but sonar operators shouted in alarm as new underwater contacts appeared. "These aren't surface boats anymore," one sonar tech reported, voice tight. "They've gone subsurface. Modified hulls, likely shaped charges. They're coming in fast." This was a nightmare scenario. Surface-to-air missiles were useless against submerged targets, and even the Phalanx CIWS struggled to track drones half hidden by the chop. The destroyer's sonar grid came alive, additional buoys splashing into the water as the MH-60R Seahawk circled overhead, mapping the undersea chaos. "They're exploiting the gaps between radar and sonar," the tactical officer realized. "They're layering the attack." The captain's expression hardened. "They've changed the game." Alarms wailed as torpedo-like signatures closed from multiple bearings. Depth charges rolled from the stern, detonating in thunderous underwater plumes that shook the hull. Decoys splashed, creating false acoustic trails to draw the drones away. Some of the attackers were shredded instantly, their fragments bubbling to the surface. But several pressed on, their motors buzzing toward the ship's vulnerable underside. On the surface, the remaining aerial and sea-skimming drones surged simultaneously, timing their push with the underwater wave. It was a coordinated tri-layer assault, air, surface, and subsurface converging in a single moment. The destroyer's CIWS guns screamed, barrels glowing as they stitched tracer fire across the black water. ESSM and RAM stocks were nearly depleted. The crew could feel it. The ship was running low on arrows in its quiver. Yet they kept firing with cold precision, prioritizing high-threat clusters. Sailors covered their ears against the deafening roar. Then came the first real hit. One drone slipped through, detonating close enough to shear off an antenna mast. Sparks rained down as comm systems scrambled. Damage control raced to reroute power through scorched conduits, extinguish small fires, and stabilize sensor feeds. Below deck, engineers worked in heat and noise, patching circuits like surgeons in a battlefield hospital. Above, the Seahawk unleashed Hellfire missiles on disguised fishing vessels further out, targeting launch platforms feeding the swarm. Fireballs lit the horizon as several platforms exploded, silencing multiple nodes of the assault network, but the pressure didn't stop. Chinese operators weren't aiming for one decisive kill. They were measuring. Every reaction, every missile launch, every gun burst was data. The destroyer's crew knew it. This wasn't just a battle. It was a live experiment for future warfare. The underwater drones pressed hardest now. Several burst through the sonar perimeter, aiming to detonate under the keel where the ship was most vulnerable. Countermeasures deployed, decoys, mini-depth charges, active sonar pings designed to confuse targeting. Explosions erupted in rapid succession beneath the ship, sending shudders through the decks. Flooding in compartment Bravo 2, contained, damage control reported. The captain gripped the console, knuckles white. They're not just attacking, they're writing the new playbook right under our noses. Even as ammunition dwindled, the destroyer's layered defense adapted on the fly. Fire control officers adjusted firing zones to maximize CIWS coverage. Sonar teams recalibrated buoys mid-battle to plug detection gaps. Damage control rerouted power seamlessly to keep sensors online. The crew wasn't just surviving, they were evolving. Every sailor understood that if even a handful of these underwater kamikazes reached the hull, the outcome could flip in seconds. Yet amidst the chaos, training held firm. The night sea roared with explosions, gunfire, and the eerie buzzing of drones in water. Above, the stars were invisible, blotted out by smoke, tracer fire, and burning wreckage. This was no longer a skirmish. It was a glimpse of tomorrow's multi-domain swarm warfare, where speed, adaptation, and endurance decided who stayed afloat. When the last echoes of gunfire faded, a heavy silence settled over the East China Sea. Smoke drifted on the wind, mingling with the salty spray. The Arleigh Burke destroyer, scorched and battered, rode the dark swells like a stubborn fortress refusing to sink. Ben antenna masts pointed awkwardly skyward. Some sensors flickered weakly, but the ship was still in the fight and still afloat. Damage reports flowed in. Minor flooding had been contained. Several radar arrays were offline, but propulsion remained intact. Ammunition stocks were low, ESSM and RAM launchers nearly dry, and the CIWS barrels glowed from sustained fire. Yet the crew, though exhausted, stood steady at their stations. Their layered defense had been stretched to the brink but had not broken. In the dim light of the CIC, tactical screens showed the aftermath like a storm map. Over 160 to 200 sea drones had been launched in total. The ship's kill rate hovered between 85 and 95%. A brutal exchange fought meter by meter. Multiple disguised fishing vessels, really mobile launch platforms, were confirmed destroyed. Burning wrecks marking their graves on the horizon. For China, the material loss was substantial, but material wasn't the point. This assault had been about data collection, a rehearsal to map how U.S. defenses respond under saturation. Every intercepted drone, every sonar ping, Every CIWS burst was telemetry for planners watching from afar. For the U.S. crew, relief mingled with unease. They had held the line, but at a cost. Each missile expended was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each drone destroyed cost only a fraction of that. The economic exchange was asymmetric, and Beijing had demonstrated how swarms could slowly bleed even the most advanced warships' magazines dry. Still, the core doctrine held. Layered defense, satellite cueing, radar, electronic warfare, missiles, guns, helicopters, patrol aircraft, and disciplined crew coordination had worked as intended. Damage control teams kept critical systems online, and rapid counterstrikes against disguised launchers blunted the assault before it could regenerate into another wave. Analysts would later call this clash a window into the future. Naval warfare defined not just by range and firepower, but by volume, adaptation, and cost curves. A future where cheap expendables test the limits of expensive defenses, and where victory depends as much on endurance and logistics as on raw lethality. As dawn broke, the destroyer's silhouette emerged against the soft light, scarred but unbowed. Smoke curled from the deck. Sailors moved methodically through post-battle routines, eyes scanning the horizon for the next wave. Overhead, a Seahawk circled watchfully, the last guardian in a night that had nearly rewritten the rules of naval combat. For the Chinese strategists, the night had provided data points. For the U.S. Navy, it had provided a warning. Swarm warfare wasn't coming someday, it was already here. And for the crew who stood their ground through hour after hour of relentless assault, this wasn't about headlines or politics. It was about holding the line when it mattered most. In these contested waters, surrounded by shifting strategies and new technologies, steel, discipline, and human resolve had carried the night. The sea grew quiet again, but everyone on board knew it was only temporary. The next engagement would come, faster, sharper, smarter, and when it did, they would be ready.